What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Driving with Duck. Always on Facebook, most of the time on YouTube, sometimes on the IG. So I want to talk to y'all about something that just occurred to me today. A lot of my exes will tell you that I have a problem with both of these things I'm going to talk about in this particular video. Hindsight and forethought. Two things that intersect each other but very seldom meet. And if you think about it, you'll know that I'm right. Hindsight, by definition, is something that you think of after the fact. Forethought is something that you think about, is the act of thinking of something that happens before you do it. Or is the act of thinking before you do it, right? Forethought is thinking before you do something, right? And we as humans, if you're your average human, you don't think a lot before you do something. It's almost like planning, but not really, because planning requires writing something down and being meticulous, right? Forethought is just the simple act of kind of being knowledgeable in what you're about to do with emotion, right? And a lot of times you can find yourself in a situation and being like, I know I've been there before. Should I or should I not do this? Because I know how it made me feel before and I know it ended up shitty. How about I don't put myself in this situation again? But a lot of times people end up putting themselves in that same fucking situation again and act surprised when it turns out the exact same fucking way again. Or they find themselves in that same scenario just as miserable, if not more miserable, the second time around. And they end up betting the whole farm thinking it's going to turn out different. You know how they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result? Yeah, just like that. Or you take the same type of thing and you paint it a different color, but yet you think that just by painting it a different color that it's going to react differently or it's going to perform differently just because it's a different color. Yeah, that. You change one thing invariably and you expect it to act brand new, but it's really not. Yeah. I mean, you can speak life into something, but if you take no actionable offense into something, it's not going to change. You literally have to do, right? But back to the point at hand, hindsight and forethought. See, a lot of times people will go through something and they'll look back at it and be like, wow, that was absolutely insane. And you come out on the good side of it and you may have just escaped trouble by the skin of your teeth and gotten lucky. Some people will look at it and be like, damn, that was just me. I'm just untouchable. Others will take the blessing and say, I'll never do that shit again. But then you could have been someone like me. And the way that I used to react to shit, I was always a thrill seeker. And I was always like, you know what? One time wasn't enough for me. Let me go back and do that dumb shit again and see how much closer I can ride to the razor's edge and see how close I can get without getting cut. And I wouldn't have the forethought to think ahead and be like, brother, do you realize how close you were to death? Do you realize how close you were to screwing that shit up last time? Don't you think you ought to give it a rest? Do you realize the variables that were in your face to where you could have actually not survived that? Do you realize how close you were to ruining everything you have? Don't you think you ought to give it a rest and just let sleeping dogs lie and just call it a day? People do that all the time. I know I'm not the only person. People do that all the time. People go through things in life where they look at stuff in hindsight and in retrospect, they look back at it and they're like, wow, that was really a close call. I should really be thankful that I made it through that. But they don't humble themselves and realize, wow, I've got to stop and reflect and really take inventory and be thankful that I made it through that scenario. And take stock in what I have and be like, yeah, I got to relax and temper myself a little bit. And realize my mortality and be like, you know what? I'm going to lay back in the cut and I'm just going to relax. And I'm going to chill on what I have. And then have the forethought to look at it and say, okay, I'm going to just lay back. I'm not going to play this one through. I'm going to just cut my losses and I'm going to just chill right here. And then they bet the farm and then lose everything. And then they're questioning everything after that. Why me? Why did this happen to me? Well, because you were a dumbass. That's why this shit's happening to you. And then next thing you know, they're sitting in a therapist's office questioning their whole damn life experience. Blaming everybody but themselves. And I find myself doing that at some various points. And I could pinpoint it to one particular experience at some point in my life. Or I can pinpoint that to one particular experience. But most people don't want to do that. Most people will look back at things and they'll blame someone else. It was that person's fault. It was that person's fault. It was this particular instance. If that person hadn't have said that, if this person hadn't have done that, well, if this job hadn't have made me do this, that's above my pay grade, that's outside of my realm. If that hadn't have happened, maybe I'd be in a better position in life. If this hadn't have happened to that person, and then that person wouldn't have done this, and then it wouldn't have been a domino effect on down to me. Because people don't use hindsight and then have the forethought. Two things that intersect but never meet. It's crazy the way that stuff works. Because people don't humble themselves to look at the whole scenario and look at everything and see how it goes and say, you know what? If I look at where I've been before, I can think about where I'm going and know that I'll never do that shit again. And I'll stay right where I am and wait for the next train instead of hopping on this one. Because this train looks like a clusterfuck and it is not for me. It may have been for me before, but I remember how that one turned out and I'm not doing that shit again. I'm all set. And you know what? We can eliminate a lot of problems if we don't fuck with shit we shouldn't be fucking with. Because like we tell our children, if you touch a hot stove and it burns you one time, guess what you'll never do again? You'll never touch another hot stove, I'll tell you that. If you cut yourself on a sharp knife and it cuts you that one time, you learn. You learn from experience. That's what hindsight is good for. You recall up those past events and you say, you know what, I'll never do that shit again. Because those variables that teach you a lesson, you remember that shit. If it bothers you enough, you have that shit in your inventory. You have that memory recall. And you're like, you know what, I'll never go through that shit again. Sometimes we're pig-headed and we don't like to remember. And I can tell you this. I've been through a lot of things over the past few years, and I can tell you, I will not forget a lot of the things I've been through. And I will say I'll never do a lot of the shit that I've done over the past 4 or 5 years. I promise to myself, I owe it to myself to remember. I'll never do a lot of the shit that I've done. Simply because that memory recall is strong as hell. It's got kung fu grip. I will not do a lot of the shit that I've done. I know better. I have learned my lesson. The only way to stay is up. That hindsight and that forethought, the two things that normally intersect but never meet, they're going to stay like best friends now. They're going to be thick as thieves because they have to be. In life, you have no choice. Because in order for you to grow and become more mature, they have to meet in the middle. They have to intersect and they have to have that memory recall. That's a part of being mature and that's a part of maturity. It's a part of life. It's part of growing up. You can take the loss, but you don't have to lose the lesson. Just something to think about. Hindsight, forethought. Two things that should intersect. And when they do, you make sure that they meet each other. Say hello. This has been another edition of Driving with Doug. I wish you all the best day. Love and light, my friends.